Okay, everybody. Welcome to this CND webinar, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Never Again. Over the past few days, we've seen very moving tributes and memorials on this 75th anniversary of the droppings of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Across the world, there have been many events, and a lot of those, of course, have been online because of the pandemic, but the memory of those terrible events is strong and live in our communities. Today, we want to explore the impact of those crimes in the decades since, in particular, on the peoples of those countries and the ways in which movements have worked to prevent such crimes ever happening again. We have two international guests. We have Yayoi Tsuchida. She is Assistant General Secretary of Gensuikyo in Japan. Gensuikyo is the Japan Council Against A&H Bombs. Gensuikyo is a long-standing mass, peace and anti-nuclear campaign, working closely with the hibakusha, the survivors, and committed to global abolition of nuclear weapons. Our second guest is Kevin Martin from Peace Action in the USA. Peace Action is a grassroots US-wide campaign working on a range of peace issues, including nuclear weapons. Peace Action was founded in 1957, so it's actually older than CND, which was founded in 1958. So it's going to be really very interesting to hear from both Japan, which experienced those bombs, and from the peace movement in the US, the government of which, of course, was responsible for those crimes in 1945. Yayoi and Kevin will speak for 10 minutes each. During the course of the meeting, we'll be hearing from Bruce Kent, the Vice-President of CND. The technology is just being sorted out for that. So the theme of Never Again, I'm hoping that we can explore in more detail in the Q&A. So after Yayoi and Kevin have spoken, we'll move to Q&A. Please put your questions in the Q&A box. And also, if you wish to engage via chat, please do that too. And I know that Yayoi and Kevin will try and respond in the chat box as well. But it's good to have Q&A through the Q&A box, because then I can present the questions and everyone will have the benefit of hearing the answers. So without further ado, Yayoi, please begin your contribution.
Thank you, Kate. Dear friends, it is an honor for me to join you in the webinar, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Never Again. Since August the 2nd, we have organized the World Conference Against A&H Bombs online. Through this process, I was touched by your enthusiasm and solidarity for achieving together our common goal, a world without nuclear weapons. I sincerely thank Kate, your Secretary General of CND, to join us and speak, waking up at midnight. A call for unity of peace movements and for creating a surge, which we did at the time of the war on Iraq, was well welcomed by the conference participants. I really appreciate her and your contribution to a success of the World Conference. Yesterday, on August the 6th, we commemorated the 75th anniversary of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. Japanese people have solemn feeling to see the peace ceremony held in the Hiroshima city and the testimonies of hibakusha are broadcast on TV. When that day comes, the Japanese people renew the determination not to repeat the tragedy of the atomic bombing. At the same time, there is a tendency that the A-bomb experience is faded away. There is an increase of people, in particular young people, who don't know what happened on August the 6th and the 9th. It is partly because of bad education in Japan. The government does not want children to know about the Japan's war of aggression and the damage of atomic bombing. But we have many cases that young people change when they hear the stories of the hibakusha. They think that they should do something for peace. When we try to collect petitions, for example, in front of a school gate, the school authority tries to stop us. However, now high school students started to collect petitions inside schools after hearing the hibakusha's testimony. I believe that the hibakusha's stories have power to change people and the world. Now, when humanity is faced with existential threats of nuclear weapons, the hibakusha's stories have a special meaning, we think. The average age of the hibakusha is over 80 years old. We are strengthening activities to inherit the hibakusha's stories and struggle. CND has often given them opportunities to speak before your people. We really appreciate your activity to host them and hope that you will continue to do so. Due to the corona pandemic, the world is in terrible trouble. In addition to that, humanity is faced with crises caused by climate change and the weapons of mass destruction, including nuclear weapons. P5, nuclear weapon states equal the permanent member of the UN Security Council do not take action for resolving these global issues. On the contrary, they are taking military first policies and unilateral acts like America first, increasing the danger facing us. We think that the absence of their leadership is the most critical situation. The outrage of big powers is happening in Asia now. US-China confrontation has raised military tension. China continues hegemonistic maritime activity, claiming sovereignty over the South China Sea as well as the East China Sea. The US Trump administration is increasing its military responses to China, conducting military exercises with nuclear-powered aircraft carriers deployed. In times of the coronavirus crisis, such war games should be stopped immediately. I would strongly urge both the US and China to seek a peaceful resolution based on international law instead of resorting to armed conflict and nuclear weapons. Northeast Asia, where Japan is located, has nuclear hotspots. China and North Korea, which have nuclear weapons, are confronted by the Japan-US and US-South Korea military alliances. In 2017, confrontation between the US and North Korea developed into the brink of nuclear war. In Asia, where it is full of nuclear weapons and conflicts, we very much welcomed the adoption of the treaty on the prevention or prohibition of nuclear weapons in 2017. It was the earnest desire of the Hibakusha. We think that with the treaty, the world steered toward saving humanity from the threat of nuclear weapons. But Japanese Prime Minister Abe do not hesitate to declare that he would not support or sign or ratify the TPNW, even in the presence of the Hibakusha. Behind this attitude, there is Japan's deep dependence on the US nuclear umbrella. At the Japan-US extended deterrence dialogue, Japan has even asked for a guarantee that the US would use nuclear weapons. Humanity and Earth can be annihilated by any nuclear weapon explosion. How come can nuclear weapons defend Japan and its people? The way Japan should take as the only able-bodied country is to leave the US nuclear umbrella and join the TPNW. We are confident that we can change Japanese politics because people's cooperation centering on the international signature campaign in support of the Hibakusha appeal is getting to lay siege to the Japanese government. The number of signatures collected for the Hibakusha International Signature Campaign reached 11,840,000 as of the end of March this year. The number of local governments that have adopted resolutions demanding the Japanese government sign and ratify the treaty has increased to 468, which account for 26% of all local governments in Japan. A public opinion poll shows that more than 65% of the respondents say the Japanese government should join the TPNW. All opposition parties are now united in urging the government to join the treaty. In addition, the Japanese government was forced by the strong opposition of the people to withdraw its plan to deploy Aegis Ashore military missile defense system, which sent shockwaves to the US government. In the prefecture assembly election of Okinawa in June, the opposition forces of the new US base construction won an overwhelming victory. For achieving a nuclear-free Asia and the world, our movement in Japan, the only atomic bomb country, should continue to send the message together with the Hibakusha that humankind cannot coexist with nuclear weapons. And we think it is our task of the Japanese movement. We need to make the Japanese government join the TPNW and shift its policies to the direction of nuclear-free and peace, based on the peace constitution and the national policy of the 3 non-nuclear principles, which is not to possess, not to produce, and not to allow bringing of nuclear weapons into Japanese territory. In the midst of corona pandemic, there is a growing call that priority should be given to such issues as climate change, healthcare, and welfare services, which are critical for protecting people's lives and safety. This can serve as a spur to further develop our movement, in spite of the fact that many people are economically affected by corona pandemic. The Japanese government refuses to cut the defense budget, which has reached a record high, and continues the bulk buying of US weapons. We are determined to drive the government into a corner even from this point. We witnessed the historic scenes that South Korean President Moon Jae-in and North Korean Chairman Kim Jong-un together crossed the border during the summit. And the US President Trump and North Korean Kim Jong-un met for the summit. We learned that the governments or their leaders decide and take action, things would change dramatically. So we think changing politics is very important. And we must not forget, however, that the government can be moved only by people's opinion and actions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Yayoi. That was really very interesting, and there's a huge amount for us to think about and learn from. So thanks very much indeed. Okay, so now over to Kevin. Your turn, Kevin. Unmute.
Thank you very much, and I apologize that I'll probably be the worst English speaker, for this event. I'm very glad to be with CND and also with Gensuikyo, valued partners of peace action and of all the peace groups here in the United States. Also, it's particularly pleasing for me because I have Scottish and Ulster and English heritage, including Quakers on that side. The other side of my family is Swiss and German Mennonites. So it was sort of genetic that I would become a peace activist. I was also born just after the Cuban Missile Crisis. So all of that background, I guess, determined what I would be doing for a living. So I bring you greetings from an imploding superpower, from a dying empire. And maybe that's what we should be talking about, especially more in the Q&A. But I will focus mostly on the state of play in terms of movement work here in the United States around nuclear disarmament, and then prospects for the near-term future, particularly if we have a change in administration and in Congress. So I think one of the things that colors all of the work that we're doing right now is the real turmoil that's going on here in the United States. And I think it's necessary turmoil in terms of against police militarization, the brutal police murders of innocent Black people, of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and others, and the very strong Black Lives Matter movement that is so important in this country. And of course, with the pandemic and our government failing so badly, these two things dominate everything in the United States right now, as I'm sure you know and can imagine. And when you look at sort of the longer scope of history, I think about this every day. And last night we had a terrific webinar featuring Masuko Wada from Nihon Hidankyo, who of course is a Nagasaki survivor, and also from the Poor People's Campaign here in the United States, Reverend Liz Theo-Harris. And the Poor People's Campaign is very strong at linking the triple evils or the giant triplets that were denounced by Martin Luther King over 50 years ago now: racism, militarism, and economic exploitation. And I think about that every day, and I think about Peace Action's work to address and hopefully overcome and overwhelm those. I have to say, though, I don't think the United States is capable of overcoming those triple evils. I think they're just endemic in our society at this point, as the pandemic now is going to be endemic. However, what gives me hope is not necessarily that I have a prediction of a good outcome. It's about people rising up together, demanding and acting what's right and what's necessary. And in that regard, I've been very pleased this year. Peace Action and other organizations, over 100, came together this year to work together to organize and promote events around this 75th anniversary of the crimes, as Kate correctly calls them, of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And we actually started with some of the events here earlier in July because we thought it was important to try to inoculate as best we could the triumphalism or the myths or the lies about the necessity, quote unquote, of the bombs to end the war and to save 1 million lives of American troops who would have had to invade Japan. That's always been a lie. They made that up. The people in the government at the time who wanted to use the bombs, not only against Japan, but also as a warning to the Soviet Union, they admitted that they made them up. So we helped to organize 3 or 4 webinars about the history and the decision to drop the bombs in July. We thought it was important to try to do that. And I think it had an impact. I haven't paid a whole lot of attention to the mainstream media coverage, but there hasn't been as much triumphalism or excusiology, as a colleague of mine likes to say, around that decision 75 years ago. And in terms of these organizations that joined together, again, over 100 groups, we have had really impressive events all around the United States, part of the peace wave around the world that Gensuikyo called for. And of course, we also participated with Gensuikyo and Gensuikyo in their events in Japan. So I've been very pleased to see the mobilization this year here in the States and around the world around this 75th anniversary. Now, that doesn't mean I think that there are good prospects for making solid progress towards nuclear disarmament in the United States right now. You saw just recently Bernie Sanders and some others produced an amendment calling for a 10% cut in the Pentagon budget, with that money explicitly going to poverty programs and to address the pandemic. And on the one hand, a 10% cut in the gargantuan US Pentagon budget is completely insufficient. On the other hand, it had very little support in Congress. So that really hasn't changed. Mostly bipartisan support for the endless war machine, and even for the nuclear weapons upgrade, so-called modernization, which of course was started by the Obama administration, not by the Trump administration, although Trump has certainly made it worse. And Trump's pursuit of so-called low-yield nuclear weapons that could make the use of nuclear weapons even more likely is alarming, and something that most people in this country are really not paying attention to. And that's normal, that most people in the United States don't pay attention to nuclear weapons issues. There was a survey a couple of years ago asking Americans, how many nuclear weapons do we have? And the average answer came back 300 or 400. Well, no, that's France, okay? That's not the United States. The United States, when you count all of our warheads, we have nearly 10,000. So the fact that our tax dollars pay for this and people are so willfully ignorant about the size of the nuclear arsenal, that is unfortunately a very hard nut to crack, to even get people to understand how many nuclear weapons we have and what a threat they are to the US and to the world. They don't provide deterrence, they don't defend our freedoms, they make us a target. And especially the land-based missiles, mostly in the upper Midwest and the mountain states, make the United States a target. Of course, the huge amount of money being wasted on the nuclear weapons arsenal, again, the upgrade or so-called modernization that the US and Russia started and all the other nuclear states unfortunately followed, I used to call this the monkey see, monkey do arms race, but that's not fair to monkeys. Monkeys would not be so foolish as to do this if they had these resources. Now, looking forward, I do think there are reasons to think that if there is a change in administration and the alternative to continue with the current administration is too painful to even contemplate, although I can come back to that briefly for a minute, that with a potential Biden administration, and by the way, it is a horribly depressing choice that this is what we have, Biden or more Trump, and Biden's no progressive on these issues at all. However, Biden has a pretty solid track record, both having been in the Senate and also as the vice president in the Obama administration, in believing in diplomacy and particularly treaties. So he would be smart, and there are people, including Peace Action, but others, both grassroots groups, but also elite organizations that are working to influence the Biden administration, or the Biden campaign, sorry, and hopefully then will be the Biden administration. They ought to make more of an issue of nuclear weapons because of Donald Trump's erratic nature. And Biden has done this a little bit. I think he should strengthen that in terms of a political attack on Trump. I think he should do an update of the Daisy ad that Johnson used against Goldwater back in 1964. That's how dangerous I think it is for Donald Trump to continue in the White House and to have his finger on the nuclear button, figuratively speaking. So if Biden is elected and takes office, he's going to have a lot of things on his plate immediately. He will have to negotiate with Russia to extend New START. And I think that comes up within the first few weeks of his presidency. He takes office in January. So they will have to be negotiating with Russia before that. And I think Russia may well be inclined. They've said they would like to keep New START and would like to extend it. That would just be sort of the baseline to reassure people that it's not just nuclear anarchy between the US and Russia. We hope that Biden administration would want to rejoin the Iran anti-nuclear agreement, the JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Right now, I believe the NPT review conference at the United Nations is scheduled to be held early next year. I don't expect the US or the other nuclear states to be any better. They've been really abysmal failure at the last few NPT review conferences. I don't think that will make a difference. And in terms of the Biden administration possibly pursuing budget cuts, I doubt that will happen in terms of the overall Pentagon budget or the nuclear weapons budget. But what a lot of people who really look at the budget issues say is that we are going to be in a bad way here, that we can't afford all the upgrades to nuclear weapons and still maintain the huge conventional military and 800 plus foreign bases, et cetera. So supposedly those two things are going to collide at some point, and Congress will have to make tough decisions and hopefully not continue with this $2 trillion upgrade of the US nuclear weapons arsenal. But right now, there's not a lot of pressure from the public or from Congress to make progress on that. Biden has made some good statements, and Peace Action, we do candidate bird dogging. We're one of the relatively few peace groups in the United States that works on elections. We do both nonpartisan public education and bird dogging, but we also endorse candidates, usually for House and Senate. We don't usually endorse for president. And on the campaign trail last year, we had some very skilled people that were bird dogging Biden and got him on camera saying some good things about the need to reduce nuclear weapons. But again, you would look at that as sort of middle of the road centrist to traditional arms control, maybe slight cuts with the US, between the US and Russia. Nothing radical or leadership. And I don't think anybody should expect leadership from Biden on pretty much anything. So it'll be interesting to see who is in his administration, and then the real action might be, if he only serves one term, how would the next term go? I don't see us making any moves towards the TPNW. If, horror of horrors, Trump actually does get another term, there is at least a possibility of some grand bargain with Russia on nukes. The problem is here in the United States, nobody would believe it, and there wouldn't really be much of a constituency. The Democrats would attack Trump, and the Republicans don't particularly care about arms control or disarmament. And again, the less said about the possibility of another Trump administration, the better. But I do think there is at least some possibility, and there has been talk of it, of a large bargain with Russia. And if that is the pressing scenario that we face of another Trump administration, we'll have to do what we can to push Trump, but he's so erratic, and how do you even influence the Trump administration is a question mark to everybody. So I look forward to your questions, and thank you very much again for having me. I'm very pleased to be with you here today.
Fantastic, Kevin, and that was really, really interesting. So I've got questions coming in now. Before we turn to the questions, I'm going to invite Bruce Kent to say a few words. Bruce Kent will be known to many of you. He's Vice-President of CND. Bruce, over to you and welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Yayoi, and thank you, Kevin, very much for what you've had to say. I just want to say that I think the major task, as ever, is raising public opinion, getting people active. Here in this country, we are now inflicted with this COVID business. I've been locked up myself for about 4 months, and at the same time, we're capable of spending £200 billion on another generation of nuclear weapons, so non-independent that we borrow the missiles from the United States of America. And I've never heard any campaign in the United States of America to stop us having those missiles. Public opinion is not on our side in connection with major security issues like the disease of COVID. And we need public opinion. And one of the things I don't think we talk about nearly enough is the number of accidents that there have been with nuclear weapons. We have been saved, as some general once said, by God's grace, not by anything else, not by our intelligence. Someone we should read more about, Stanislaus Petrov, who in 1983, I think, saved the world from a nuclear disaster by refusing to obey orders. Here's only one case, many examples like that. I think we need to recognize that many of the humanitarian organizations, especially in this country, like Oxfam and all the rest of them, all do very good work in relief, but they make no connection with the military consequences. I remember a few weeks ago talking about to a big charity about the disasters going on in the Yemen. And I said, well, why don't you join us in stopping Britain selling bombs to Saudi Arabia? Oh, said the chap, oh no, we can't do that, we're a charity. There's two great gulfs between those campaigning for peace and those campaigning for humanitarian, and it shouldn't be so. And indeed, the divided organizations, the United States must have at least 4 or 5 major organizations who send out messages of all sorts, but they never seem to be a united front. They always seem to be a separate group. So we have to really recognize public information is desperately important. We're not getting ourselves more security, we're getting ourselves more insecurity by the way we're going on. And ordinary people who can't buy a house, who can't get a job, who are divided for all sorts of reasons, they have to be brought in to understand that economically the whole military race is absurd. It doesn't bring security, it brings insecurity. I think, Kate, I've gone on long enough. I thank our 2 speakers very much, and I'm now going to push off and listen with great interest to the questions that come.
Thanks very much indeed, Bruce. Really to the point, as always. So thank you so much for that. So I'm going to take questions. Please do keep them coming. I'll try and take as many as I can, but we can't guarantee to take them all, obviously. The first one, Yayoi, is to you. If you could have a go at this. Yayoi, you mentioned the peace constitution in your contribution. I think that's the reference to Article 9, as I understand it, which ensures that Japan is has to be a kind of peace nation, not a war-fighting nation. I'm aware that in the past, recent past, the government has tried to get rid of Article 9 to make Japan a war-fighting nation. What is the current situation with this, and is the population still in support of Article 9 and the peace constitution? So if you could give us a shortish answer on that, that would be fantastic.
Yes, you know, the Abe, Prime Minister Abe still has an ambition to change the Article 9 of the Constitution. And now, you know, he wants to put the word of self-defense forces into Article 9. But, you know, the 2 years ago or last year, people, you know, stood up against the revision of the Constitution, and they collected more than 20 million or 30 million signatures, you know, So now, you know, still, you know, Abe cannot change the Article 9.
Okay. Right, thanks very much. I know that Gensuikyo had a really massive campaign about Article 9s a few years ago. So let's hope that you can retain that. It's pretty much a model for elsewhere as well, I think. And then Kevin, I've got a few coming up for you. One here, you mentioned Black Lives Matter movement, and of course here in the UK we've had have had and still have a big movement, very vibrant Black Lives Matter movement, and in other countries in Europe too. What's the possibility of increasing links between the Black Lives Matter movement, other civil society campaigns, including the peace movement? Is there an interface and cooperation taking place? So Kevin, could you have a go at that?
There is, and I think a couple of years ago, it might even be 3 years ago, there's a fantastic policy platform called the Movement for Black Lives, and it's closely related and a lot of leadership. And it has one of the best in terms of peace and disarmament and demilitarization policies of any progressive you know, platform you could look at. So I would highly recommend that to you. It's a pretty long platform, but they call for big cuts in spending and for nuclear disarmament. Later this month, I just found this out yesterday, a wonderful colleague of mine who some of you may have known, Michael McPherson, an African-American man who used to be the president or the executive director of Veterans for Peace, is going to be doing a webinar exactly on that topic, why the peace movement and Black Lives Matter movement are one and the same and need to be linked. A lot of that happens more at the grassroots level, and a lot of that happens in terms of solidarity, peace groups in the streets all around this country. Of course, it's been difficult with the pandemic, but it's still been very powerful. Peace organizations with African American and people of color organization in the streets demanding justice. The links go back even farther. I would recommend a book by a friend of mine named Vincent Ntandi that I'm not recalling the name of it, but if you Google his name, it's about African Americans Against the Bomb. That's what it's called. And he goes back to all the way to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but more to the 50s and 60s, Black leaders who were supporting the anti-imperial struggles around the world and saw the struggle against the bomb as part of that as well. So they're deep rooted, and even within Peace Action, for example, we're always working to increase the inclusion, the racial diversity. Our board of directors now, for example, is almost 50% people of color. That wasn't true, you know, just a few years ago. So it's something we certainly have worked on, increasing those links, and we are always trying to improve the working relationships, but also the policy analysis and the actions together as well.
Thanks very much indeed, Kevin. And if you get a chance, maybe you could put that book title and author in the chat, because I think people would be very interested to hear that. Next question is from Anne James. This is to both of you, so I'll take Yayoi first. What more do you think all the world's peace groups can do to further the attempts in the UN to ban nuclear weapons? In other words, that's to build support and bring the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons into force. Okay, so what more can we and other peace groups do to bring that into force? Yayoi, would you start with that one?
Yeah. Yes. You know, our movement had strengthened cooperation with the UN and non-nuclear weapon states. I think they are really active in promoting the abolition of nuclear weapons. So, you know, since the year 2000, the World Conference has invited them to join us and to discuss and to decide the direction that the government and the grassroots peace movement should work for. And through that cooperation, the Japanese movement could learn a lot from them. And now, you know, we are aware that they are taking initiative in promoting the TPNW. And we think that, you know, to achieve the entry into force of the treaty is rather easy. But, you know, from now on, you know, we have to take nuclear weapon states or nuclear relying states in the treaty. So the movement, you know, should work hard and create change, and change our own government stance, and to make them join the treaty. That kind of activity is important for the peace movement.
Thanks very much, Yayoi. Kevin, could you tell us about your perspective on that?
I think, unfortunately, the UN action has almost no impact on US nuclear weapons policy. That's just the way it is. The United States, again, being a dying but in denial empire, abuses the UN terribly. We've never paid attention to Article 6 of the NPT. The TPNW, the United States barely participated in that. I think the UN is still very important in terms of raising these issues, building constituencies, and being a moral force. But I don't see the TPNW or the NPT Review Conference of having any impact on US nuclear weapons policy. Now, again, if we do have a Biden administration, hopefully they'll rejoin the Paris Climate Treaty. I didn't mention that earlier. I think Biden would probably do that. So that would be great in terms of international cooperation, but that's not going to have anything to do with nuclear weapons. So I'm not saying that the work at the UN isn't important. I think it is. I just don't think it makes a dent in this bizarre, in denial, dying empire that I live. Rome on the Potomac is what I call Washington. I live just outside of Washington. It's really bizarre to live here right now. You know, we're a fourth world hyperpower empire. It's just a bizarre place to live right now.
Can I just do a personal follow-up on that? I mean, that's very interesting to hear your perspective. And of course, there are some parallels with the situation here in Britain. You know, much of the British establishment's been in denial about UK loss of status for the last 50 or 60 years. But with regard to the TPNW then, do you think it brings anything to the table then in terms of moving towards global abolition? Or I mean, a lot of peace campaigners think it's crucial.
No, I do, just no impact on the United States. I mean, I would bet you money if Biden wins, his national security team, whoever's in charge of military and foreign policy, I bet you they would not even know what the TPNW is. I think the TPNW is incredibly important as an international moral force. I'm saying it has no impact on the US national security establishment.
Okay, well, that's precisely where it needs to have an impact to really make headway. Okay, well, that's a very interesting debate. I've got one now on Mayors for Peace. CND, amongst many other campaigning organisations, is working to sign up local mayors for peace and also to get them to join in the initiative to back the TPNW, even if their own countries aren't. Can you say a little bit about the situation with mayors for peace in your own country? Does this have a resonance? And if so, how many mayors are involved? Kevin, can I turn to you first on that?
Very strong here in the United States. And of course, Mayors for Peace has been around for a long time. And you now have mayors of a lot of the big cities in the United States that do support Mayors for Peace. And also the Back from the Brink resolutions in favor of nuclear disarmament and in favor of the TPNW. We now have many of the largest cities, including some you would think are fairly conservative, that have passed resolutions in favor of nuclear weapons abolition and the TPNW. So that's very strong in terms of grassroots mobilization and education. But again, it doesn't have much of an impact at all on Congress or on the administration. Doesn't mean it's not worth doing, because it is raising up the educational aspect of the issue, which again, remember, most Americans think we have 300 or 400 nuclear weapons, not 9,000 or 10,000. So that educational aspect is important. We've even had state legislatures. So it's been cities and counties, mayors, of course, but cities, counties, and a few large state legislatures, including California, passed the Back from the Brink resolution that calls for abolishing nuclear weapons and supporting the TPNW. So it's a great grassroots campaign. It's just not having an impact yet on the power structure, and that's to be expected, unfortunately.
Okay, so I'm just going to another follow-up question to that. I mean, you think that that's not going to have much impact either. So, in your opinion, what is the key to changing the situation in the US and having a situation where nuclear disarmament is possible?
I think about this all the time, but I'd be lying to you if I said I had an easy answer, Kate. If we fully implode as a society, we're still going to hang on to our nuclear weapons. We might be more likely to use them. So I don't have any good news for you on that.
Okay, right. Yayoi, you tell us about Mayors for Peace in Japan, if you would.
Yes, so we are working together with the Mayors for Peace, and in particular, since the signature campaign in support of the appeal of the Hibakusha started in 2016, the Hibakusha positively visited the mayors and governors of local government. And now, about 70% of mayors and governors already signed the Hibakusha's petition. And as I said before, in local assemblies, about 25% of local assemblies in Japan adopted resolutions calling on the Japanese government to join the TPNW. So, majority of local governments in Japan support the abolition of nuclear weapons and urge the Japanese government to join the treaty. So, for example, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the mayor himself enters the signature campaign promotion committee, and in Nagasaki, the wide range of people and organizations joined the promotion committee. And every time they took to streets for collecting signatures, the mayor joined them. So, so we think that this time, we are successfully mobilizing local government, mayors and governors, and we think we can have good relations with them.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Yayoi. That's fantastic. Rosalie Brooks is saying that she still has hope, even though the forces are extremely hard to fight, and she thanks you both for your contributions. She also talks about more education being needed about this serious matter, and I wonder if you could both briefly say if you have any either public education initiatives specifically or any school education. CND has a peace education program in schools. Do you have anything in schools? Kevin, can I turn to you first on that one?
Yeah, so there's a very strong, but it's more, some in the high schools, but more colleges, that both Peace Action and other groups are getting more young people involved in these issues. And that's very critically important because a lot of young people did not grow up during the Cold War. You know, they've come to the age of voting without really knowing a lot about these issues. One of our affiliates in New York State has been particularly strong. And they do some curriculum, but it's more around activism and organizing. And there's some terrific young leaders here in the United States who are working to raise these issues, but in an intersectional way, doing it along with racism and economic justice and environmental justice, not necessarily just a focus on nuclear disarmament, but that's to be expected. And just to be clear, my vision of hope is maybe different than others. My hope is from people banding together to do what's right and demand what's right. My hope is not dependent on a prediction of a good outcome, because I don't really have a prediction of a good outcome right now. Václav Havel and Thich Nhat Hanh talk about hope in that way much more eloquently than I could. I wouldn't get up every day if I didn't think that this work was incredibly important. I didn't have hope. It's just I don't have hope that in the near term, action X will lead to good outcome Y, just to be clear about my understanding of hope and how it works for me.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you, Kevin. Yayoi, something on educational programs from Gensuikyo?
Gensuikyo's education program, this time we produced a study pamphlet, and because even among even among workers who are working at democratic organizations and trade unions, they are not interested in nuclear weapons issue. So we produced a new type of study pamphlet asking prominent people to write something for the pamphlet. Like, for example, we asked the UN High Representative Izumi Nakamitsu to give us a comment, and she agreed. So we have the comments by Nakamitsu and the TV actors and the environmental activists and hospital doctors who are now engaged in treatment of corona pandemic, and about military spending activists, etc. So that we hope that people can understand, the current situation over peace and nuclear weapons. And now, it was distributed, it was spread to about 70,000 people. So I hope that this kind of pamphlet will help help these people learn about nuclear weapons. And we are positively trying to organize meetings to hear the hibakusha's stories. It is very effective for young people to learn the importance of abolishing nuclear weapons. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yayoi. That's good. So we've just got we're into the last few. Bruce, do you want to say something there? Unmute yourself.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Bruce.
I just want to point out, nobody knows about it, but I'm a very bad Catholic, but Pope Francis has actually condemned not the use, but the possession of nuclear weapons. But nobody knows about it, even within the Catholic Church. Why aren't we publicizing the people who are on our side around the world? Why are we being silent when an ally like that can be really supported? That's all for me. God bless you all.
Thanks very much, Bruce. Yeah, and that's an absolutely crucial point. You know, in terms of the faith communities, they are massively active on this issue. And for CND, certainly, they are amongst our principal partners, and we very much value that cooperation. So now I'm going to turn to Kevin and Yayoi to answer one final question. And that we've had a few comments and questions in about the best way to achieve denuclearization on an international level and issues like that. So I just would like to ask you both, what is your campaigning priority in the year ahead? What is if you had to choose one of the many things that you're doing, what is the single issue that you can tell us about that you think will help improve a difficult situation? Kevin, over to you first.
Again, I mentioned that peace action is relatively unique in terms of our focus on election work and also on lobbying Congress. So we are helping to elect really solid progressives, and a lot of them are young women of color. And I think we are going to see a change within the Democratic Party. It's difficult, but a more progressive wing and leadership within the Democratic Party. And a lot of these candidates, and again, many young progressive women of color, don't necessarily know a lot about peace and disarmament and nuclear weapons issues, but we're able to help educate them, do briefings with them, and get them materials, as well as endorsing them and supporting their candidacies. And then with hopefully a change in administration and hopefully a better Congress, whacking away if we can at the budget, particularly the nuclear weapons budget, but also the overall Pentagon budget. Because if we don't get this pandemic under control, which I don't see any evidence that we are, we're going to have dire human needs here, hunger, homelessness, worse than we've ever seen since the Great Depression. And one of the only ways to get the resources to address those dire human needs will be to take it from the war machine. So I think those are probably going to be the priorities for the next year. And a lot of that is sort of working within Congress and the administration, but pressuring from a grassroots level for the most part. That's how Peace Action does it with our chapters and affiliates around the country.
Mm. Thanks very much, Kevin. And certainly from our perspective in CND, that attacks on the war budgets, you know, and the weapons budgets when there is so much human need, I mean, particularly around the health services Bruce was mentioning earlier on, that's a big focus for us. And finally, Yayoi, over to you.
Yes. We think that we have to continue and make more effort to raise awareness of people in Japan and rest of the world about the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons through the Hibakusha's testimony. And in view of the current situation, we will expand the cooperation with climate change activists, or we will approach the nuclear weapon issue from economical viewpoints like military spending and like that. And within 1 year, we will have the general election, and our main focus in Japan is to make the government change its politics, supporting war and the nuclear umbrella. We think we need to change the Japanese politics to the direction of nuclear free and peace by forcing the government to join the TPNW is our main activity target.
Thanks very much indeed, Yayoi. I'm afraid we're out of time now, so to all those who've put in questions that we haven't had time to answer, apologies, but really thank you all for really stimulating such an interesting discussion. So huge thanks to Bruce, to Kevin, and to Yayoi. We've really appreciated your contributions today. So thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you again in our activities in the peace movement globally. And thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.